Welcome back, my friend. It's so wonderful to settle in with you again for another quiet evening in the valley. Tonight's tale has a rather special origin that grew right out of a slow Sunday morning walk I took not so long ago. I was wandering down a forgotten winding country lane when I came across an old, disused stone well, half hidden beneath a curtain of wild ivy. As I leaned over the cool limestone lip, looking down into that deep, velvety dark, I dropped a small pebble and listened to the long, hollow silence before the distant plop of the water. Standing there in the quiet woods, I found myself wondering, what if the deep places of the earth aren't just holding water, but are listening to the unspoken worries of the people who walk above them? What if an ancient community well could act as a bridge of quiet empathy? That very afternoon, the image of Berry lowering his oak bucket into the dark and pulling up something entirely unexpected appeared in my mind, and the well of timely gifts was born. So let us find that perfect cozy spot under the blankets. Let the busyness of your day dissolve into the shadows, and let us return to the very beginning of our frosty autumn morning. The morning arrived in a coat of silver and absolute silence. A sharp early frost had swept through the valley dales during the dark hours, transforming every blade of orchard grass into a delicate glittering glass needle. Outside the windows of Rosehip Cottage, the wild briars were dusted with fine white crystals, and the cold air carried the crisp, clean scent of dry cedarwood and frozen earth. Inside the kitchen, the great black cast-iron stove was roaring merrily away, its flue singing a low, predictable hum against the north wind. Berry made his way around the room with slow, heavy morning steps, his feet cozy in his thick knit slippers, the left one having slid forward slightly and was flapping on the floorboards as he moved. He lifted the heavy copper kettle to fill it for the morning tea, but when he turned the brass tap over the stone sink, not a single drop emerged, nary a one. The underground pipes, you see, running from the natural spring on the hillside, had frozen completely solid in the night. "Well," Rosco murmured from his high-backed chair, "the frost has certainly come early this year. We'll need to make our way down to the village common, Berry. The old stone well never freezes, no matter how hard the winter bites." "I'll go," Berry said, wrapping his thick, heather-purple wool scarf twice around his neck and pulling his heavy tweed coat over his shoulders. He lifted the large kitchen bucket, a beautiful, sturdy vessel crafted from staves of dark English oak, bound together by thick iron hoops. It was heavy, even when empty, smelling faintly of the clean well water it had carried for generations. The walk down the lane was a journey through a frozen landscape. The sun had put his hat on and was just beginning to peek over the eastern ridges, casting long, pale amber ribbons of light across the misty common. The ancient stone well stood right in the centre of the green, beneath the bare branches of a huge sleeping elm tree. Its circular wall was built from heavy moss-covered limestone blocks, worn smooth by centuries of bucket rims and resting elbows. A small weathered cedar roof sheltered the iron windlass, and a thick weathered hemp rope coiled around the spindle. Berry stepped up to the stone lip, set his own oak bucket down, and unhooked the well's wooden bucket from the iron chain. Peering over the edge, he looked down into the deep, cylindrical dark. The bottom was completely hidden in shadows, a quiet, forgotten room, echoing with the distant, liquid whisper of the earth. Moving slowly, Berry began to lower the bucket. The iron crank turned with a spindulous metallic rumble, and the thick hemp rope uncoiled from the wooden drum, whispering softly as it disappeared into the dark abyss. He waited for the familiar, echoing splop of the wood hitting the deep water. But today, the sound that rose from the depths was entirely different. It was a dull, solid wooden thud, followed by a strange metallic ring that vibrated up the length of the rope. Berry blinked in absolute befuddlement. He took hold of the iron handle and began to crank the windlass backward, winding the heavy rope back onto the spindle. The bucket felt surprisingly heavy, but it didn't slosh or sway with the weight of slopping water. As the wooden rim finally cleared the mossy limestone lip, Berry leaned over and peered inside. There was no water, nary a drop. Resting perfectly flat on the damp wooden bottom was a large, beautifully carved key. It was fashioned from a single piece of dense, golden-brown heartwood, its barrel etched with fine decorative walls. But what caught Berry's eye instantly was a small, delicate ornament tied to the key's handle. It was a single long stalk of dried rye straw, braided into a neat sailor's knot. Berry reached into the bucket and lifted the key. It felt incredibly smooth in his paw. He held the straw up to the amber sunlight, his nose giving a whiskerful twitch. This wasn't ordinary wild grass. The straw had a peculiar pale yellow hue and a robust, thick stalk that only grew in one specific place in the entire parish: the high northern fields belonging to old Mr. Bramblewick. "How very peculiar," Berry muttered to himself, his breath rising in a thick puff of white steam. He tucked the mysterious golden key deep into his coat pocket, lifted his empty oak bucket, and turned back toward the lane, his mind spinning with all sorts of thinkerlings. The morning mist was just beginning to lift from the hedgerows as Berry made his way back up the lane. Instead of turning toward the gate of Rosehip Cottage, his curiosity guided his feet further north, toward the timber outbuildings that sat at the edge of the rye fields. As he rounded the limestone wall, he spotted Mr. Bramblewick, standing outside his seed shed. The old man was a picture of absolute silent despair. He was hunched over, his hands buried deep in his waistcoat pockets, staring at the great timber doors of his barn. "Good morning, Mr. Bramblewick," Berry called out gently, his voice breaking the crisp silence. "A sharp frost we had last night." The old man turned, his thick grey beard frosted white around his moustache, making him look like an ancient winter spirit. "A sharp frost indeed, young Berry," he sighed, his voice rather weary. "A frost that has done me a terrible turn. The ancient brass padlock on my seed doors has frozen completely solid. The tumblers inside won't budge a single inch, and my iron key snapped right off in the keyhole." Mr. Bramblewick gestured toward the door, where a big brass lock hung. "Inside that barn is my entire winter store of grain and squash. If I can't get those doors open before the midday sun melts the frost into damp moisture, the rice sacks will begin to sweat, and the whole harvest will rot before the first snow falls. I was just standing here looking at these timbers, wishing with every fibre of my old heart that there was some way inside." Berry felt a sudden electric tinglement of understanding run from the tips of his long ears right down to his cotton tail. Without saying a word, he reached into his deep coat pocket and withdrew the heavy carved wooden key. The long stalk of braided rice straw dangled from the handle, catching the morning light. Mr. Bramblewick's jaw dropped so low his beard brushed his collar. He stared at the key, then at the rice straw, his eyes wide as teacups. "By the great oak," he gasped. "Berry, that straw is from my own northern terrace. Where in the world did you get that?" "The old well gave it to me instead of water," Berry said softly, stepping forward. He placed the golden wooden key into the bottom of the frozen brass lock. It didn't seem to care about the ice or the jammed tumblers. The moment the wood slid into the brass channel, there was a soft, radiating hiss of disappearing frost. With a smooth, effortless, and entirely satisfying click, the great lock sprang open. Mr. Bramblewick let out a mighty roaring laugh that shook the dry leaves from the nearby briars. He threw the heavy timber doors wide, revealing rows of perfectly dry golden grain sacks. "I don't understand it, lad," he chuckled, clapping a heavy hand on Berry's shoulder. "But the valley has a long memory, and it seems it knew my barn was in trouble before I even did." Berry smiled, his heart feeling wonderfully light and warm despite the freezing morning. He bade the old man a good day and walked back toward Rosehip Cottage, the empty oak bucket swinging at his side, eager to tell Caratina about the extraordinary magic waiting at the bottom of the lane. By the time Berry returned to Rosehip Cottage, the kitchen was filled with the rich, earthy aroma of toasted oats and dried chamomile. Caratina was at the table, methodically arranging a row of clean earthenware jars. She listened in silence as Berry set the empty oak bucket by the hearth and recounted the story of the wooden key, the braided rye straw, and the frozen barn doors. When he finished, she set down her linen cloth. Her dark eyes were bright with a quiet wonder. "The well didn't just give you a tool, Berry," she said softly, her voice low and measured. "It responded to a need that existed before you even arrived at the common. If the well listens to the valley, then there must be a pattern to how it decides to give." That afternoon, after the sun had reached its low winter peak and begun its slow descent behind the western ridges, the two bunnies walked back down to the village common. The sharp morning frost had softened into a gentle, damp mist that clung to the roots of the sleeping elm tree. Caratina carried a small leather-bound ledger and a stick of graphite. She was determined to understand the nature of the well's gifts. She stepped up to the limestone rim, leaning over to look into the dark, velvety depth. "Let us try to speak to it," she whispered, her voice echoing hollowly against the damp stones. "If it hears the valley, perhaps it hears us directly." Berry cleared his throat, feeling a bit self-conscious in the open air. He leaned over the lip and called down in a low, polite voice. "A pleasant afternoon to you, old well. If it isn't too much trouble, we're rather short on honey for our morning porridge." They waited. The only response was the faint, distant drip of condensation sliding down the hidden limestone walls below. Caratina tapped her graphite stick against her chin. "Perhaps it requires a specific manner of request, a rhyme or a statement of pure intent." She leaned over the edge, her voice clear and rhythmic. "Deep roots of the valley, water and stone, grant us a token for the hearth and the home." Berry turned the iron windlass, the rope whispering softly as the wooden bucket lowered into the dark abyss. They listened intently until a soft, clean plop confirmed the bucket had reached the water. There was no wooden thud this time. When they reeled the bucket back to the surface, it was filled to the brim with clear, cold water. Perfect, sweet well water, but entirely ordinary. Caratina frowned slightly, making a neat, small note in her ledger. "It does not respond to direct requests," she murmured, her ears twitching in thought. "It isn't a shopkeeper. The key was given when someone was in genuine distress, quite separate from the person lowering the bucket." For the next hour they tried several gentle variations. They spoke of the cold weather, they whispered names of old valley trees, and they even tried lowering the bucket in complete, meditative silence. Each time the well returned nothing but pure, clean water. It was a beautiful reward in itself, but it kept its mysterious logic completely hidden beneath the surface. As the twilight began to paint the sky in shades of deep plum and soft slate grey, Berry lifted the full water buckets to carry them back to the cottage. Caratina, however, remained by the stone wall for one last moment. The village common was entirely empty now, wrapped in the profound blue stillness of a winter evening. She leaned her hands against the cool, smooth limestone, letting her thoughts just drift. She stopped trying to solve the well like a puzzle. Instead, she simply let herself feel the quiet weight of the valley. She thought about the long, cold months ahead, about the elderly neighbours whose joints ached in the frost, and about how vast and silent the world felt when the snow began to fall. Without thinking, Caratina reached down, took the well's heavy hemp rope, and lowered the wooden bucket one final time. She didn't make a wish. She didn't speak a rhyme. She just watched the hemp line disappear into the shadows, her heart filled with a quiet, protective wish for the safety of the valley's inhabitants. The bucket hit the bottom. Thump. It was the same dry, muffled sound Berry had heard that morning. Caratina's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Berry, who set down his oak buckets and hurried back to the windlass. Together, moving with slow, deliberate care, they turned the iron crank. The rope wound around the spindle, bringing the bucket up from the dark room of the earth. When the rim cleared the stone lip, Caratina reached inside. Resting in the center of the dry wooden bottom was a small, beautifully turned spindle of smooth birchwood. Wound around it was a long, single strand of thick, hand-spun wool. The wool was dyed a most remarkable colour, a deep, vibrant sky blue that seemed to hold the exact shade of the twilight sky just before the stars appear. Tied to the top of the spindle was a small twig of dried rosemary, the herb of remembrance. Caratina lifted the blue wool, holding it against the fading light. Unlike the key, she didn't instantly know who this belonged to. There were no high fields of rye to guide them this time. Rosemary and twilight blue, Caratina whispered, her thumb brushing the soft fibres of the wool. Someone in the valley is cold, Berry, or perhaps someone is simply very lonely. She tucked the spindle gently into her deep coat pocket, alongside her ledger. The mystery had deepened, but as they walked home under the first twinkling stars, the heavy water bucket swinging between them, they knew the well would guide their steps exactly where the blue wool needed to go. The next morning broke with a sky the colour of a pale robin's egg, the air still crisp and clean from the lingering autumn frost. Before leaving Rosehip Cottage, Caratina quietly checked the spindle of twilight blue wool from the evening before was in her deep coat pocket, hoping the morning walk would reveal the soul who needed its quiet comfort. She picked up the empty oak kitchen bucket, wrapping her thick heather-purple scarf around her neck, and walked down the misty path to the common to fetch the ordinary water needed for their morning tea. The valley was wonderfully still. A few chickadees were hopping silently among the sleeping elm branches as Caratina hooked the bucket to the rope. With a slow, steady, dark rhythm, she turned the windlass, letting the hemp rope uncoil into the cool, dark depths. She waited for the splash. Instead, a hollow, echoing thump rose from the dark. Caratina paused, a gentle wave of surprise washing over her. She slowly reeled the rope back up, the iron crank clinking predictably against the morning silence. When the wooden rim cleared the limestone lip, she peered inside. There was no water, nary a drop. Resting at the bottom was a thick, sturdy spool of heavy blue waxed twine, the exact heavy cord used by bookbinders to stitch together large volumes. But what made Caratina's long ears twitch with instant recognition was the wrapper. The spool was neatly wrapped in a torn scrap of heavy, cream-coloured blotter paper. Right across the centre of the paper was a fresh, distinct smudge of vibrant violet ink. Caratina smiled, a profound understanding settling softly into her heart. She knew that ink instantly. There was only one soul in the entire valley who ordered that specific, beautiful violet ink from the city. Mrs. Stickletip, the hedgehog schoolmistress, who used it every evening to grade the young hoglets' alphabet sheets. With the blue wax twine in one pocket and the twilight blue wool in the other, Caratina filled her bucket with ordinary water on a second quiet drawer, set it safely by the well base to collect later, and set off up the lane. Her first stop was a tiny shingle-roofed cottage tucked quietly behind a hedge of sleeping sweetbriar. This was the home of old Martha, a gentle elderly badger who lived alone and rarely ventured out in the biting frost. As Caratina passed the low front window, she saw Martha sitting in her rocking chair, a faded wool blanket pulled tight over her shoulders. In her lap lay an unfinished winter shawl, dyed a deep twilight blue. But the yarn had run completely out, just a few rows from the edge, leaving her unable to finish it. On the small table beside her sat a single empty rocking chair cushion and a dusty, dried sprig of rosemary, the herb of remembrance. Martha was simply staring at the unfinished stitches, her hands still, wishing with a quiet, lonely heart for a way to complete her warm winter wrap. Caratina knocked softly on the sturdy timber door. When Martha opened it, blinking sleepily, Caratina gently placed the spindle of sky-blue wool and the fresh sprig of rosemary into the old badger's paws. Martha's eyes filled with a soft, glittering warmth. She stroked the soft fibres, her voice a gentle, trembling whisper. "Oh, my dear, this is the exact weight and dye of the twilight wool I spun years ago. And the rosemary. How could you possibly have known? I was just sitting here, feeling the frost in my bones, wishing I could finish my memories." "The well was listening, Martha," Caratina smiled softly, giving the old badger's paw a gentle squeeze. wrap yourself warm today." With her heart feeling wonderfully light, Caratina continued further up the lane to the draughty stone hallway of the parish schoolhouse. Inside, Mrs. Stickletip was indeed standing over her desk in a state of quiet, unselfish worry. The heavy hemp cord binding the schoolhouse ledger books had snapped, and she was silently wishing with all her heart for a way to secure the children's records before the autumn wind got chance to scatter them. When Caratina pushed open the heavy timber door and handed the blue waxed twine to the flustered schoolmistress, Mrs. Stickletip gasped, her small black nose twitching as she looked at the violet-smudged wrapper. "Caratina, this is the exact weight I needed for the ledgers. How could you possibly have known?" "The well was listening to you too, Mrs. Stickletip," Caratina said softly, helping her hold the heavy leather volume steady. As the sturdy twine bound the books into a perfectly secure, neat stack, the last piece of the puzzle fell into place for the bunnies. The well wasn't a shop for selfish wishes. It was a mirror of the lane's silent prayers. It only gave a gift when two things happened at once. When someone in the valley was making a quiet, unselfish wish for help, and when the person pulling the rope was thinking only of their simple, everyday duty. By the time Caratina arrived home, a total blissful stillness had settled over the kitchen of Rosehip Cottage, as the last traces of daylight dissolved into the deep, velvet blue of the autumn evening. Outside, the rising north wind made a soft, rushing sigh through the wild rosehip bushes and tickled the tops of the chimney pots. But inside, the heavy timber walls held the world at bay, creating a sanctuary of absolute safety and warmth. Rosco moved around the stove with slow evening steps, bringing a large earthenware jug of fresh oat milk to the iron stovetop. He poured the creamy liquid into a small copper saucepan that sat directly over the glowing embers. Moving a wooden spoon in slow, lazy circles, he added a gentle grating of fresh nutmeg and a tiny golden drop of sweet heather honey. He let the mixture simmer with a patient bubble until a thick, velvety steam rose up into the rafters, filling the cottage kitchen with the scent of spice, sweet grain, and total contentment. Berry and Caratina sat side by side in their deep, high-backed armchairs right before the hearth. The bunnies cradled their warm stoneware mugs loosely in their paws, their long velvet ears unfolding and relaxing in the steady, radiating heat of the stove. They drank in meditative quiet. The warm, spiced milk seemed to spread a heavy, comforting relaxation down to their tumblingtons from the very first sip, washing away the chill of the morning lanes and leaving their limbs feeling delightfully lollopy, settled and still. The beautiful realization of the day sat warmly with them as they sipped. They understood now that the valley was a living tapestry, woven together by invisible threads of care. The old stone well didn't just hold water. It held the silent, unselfish needs of the neighborhood, waiting for a kind heart and a steady hand to bring the answer to the surface. By simply doing their daily duty with a clear mind, they had played their part in keeping the harmony of the lane alive. The bunnies reached down and pulled their thick, heather-purple wool blankets right up to their chinnigans, wrapping the plush, heavy fabric tight around their shoulders. The high-backed chairs cradled their tired frames perfectly, holding them in a soft embrace that felt as safe as the deep earth itself. On the center of the mantelpiece, the old clock kept up its slow, predictable, patient ticking, measuring out the quiet hours of the autumn night. The fire in the stove began to recede, settling into a lazy, deep crimson ember that cast soft, undulating shadows across the clean pine floor. With the soft, steady breathing of his companions filling the room, Berry let his eyelids grow heavy, letting go of the morning and the stone well. As you let your own eyes close now, and you sink deeper into the absolute comfort and support of your own bed, let these gentle thoughts wrap around your mind, sinking in with each slow, quiet breath. My day is beautifully complete, and there is nothing left to do. My hands are perfectly still, and my thoughts are slowing down. I am surrounded by warmth, safety, and deep, quiet comfort. I give myself full permission to let go of the world outside. I am perfectly protected, and everything is taken care of. I am ready to drift into a deep, beautiful, and restful sleep. Let the slow, lazy pulse of the night carry you deeper and deeper into the quiet dark. The lanes are quiet, the schoolhouse is warm, the grain is safe. the valley is fast asleep, and you are entirely safe. All was snug. All was well. Night night.